Okay, now that the beef has been cut and put into the marinade and that mess has been cleaned up, we're ready to continue on with the rest of the cooking process, kind of looking at some of our ingredients and identifying them. All right, if you're going to be making broccoli beef and using the mushrooms, which I strongly suggest because of the flavor they add, umami, a savory component that along with soy sauce creates a particular taste, you have to plan in advance to reconstitute your dried mushrooms. So if we are using those in class, I will be doing that ahead of time for you because it's a good 30 minutes of soaking. So before I even start on the beef, I actually had boiled off some water and put some dried mushrooms inside, and I have two to show you. This is a dried black fungus that probably triples if not quadruples in size once it's reconstituted. This is a dried shiitake, which was about this size before reconstituted. And I've seen this done with both, and I've had it with both, and I like both. If you're using the dry black fungus, most of it's been cut up for you, but when it's done, go ahead and roll this up. Okay, and then cut it in thin strips, in a sense as if you're doing a chiffonade. And you can chop that even finer. Okay, if you're doing the shiitake, the notes say that you are not to use the stem. Okay, so I'm going to make sure this is showing on camera, that you will cut the stem off, set it off to the side to discard, and then cut this into strips. Okay, thin strips. If we can get fresh shiitakes, which are out there, there's a mushroom farmer down in Vacaville, then we would use the entire mushroom. Okay, but if it's dried shiitakes, for whatever reason, the stem just never really softens up. So I'm putting both in. I just wanted you to see what they look like when they're dried. All right, the mushroom juice has no purpose for us. Okay, we had 2 to 3 cloves of garlic, using 3 teaspoons worth, say, of ginger, part of our aromatics. I have some green scallion tops cut on the bias. It's going to be a garnish. Green onions I'm going to add to the stir fry along with the ginger and garlic. This here is our slurry. There is water. I'm sorry, not water, but well, first off, there is a choice. Okay, of oyster sauce or soy sauce. If you're using oyster sauce, obviously you're introducing a shellfish element, so that could be off limits for allergens or other reasons. But you also will be introducing a fair amount of sugar. For every tablespoon of oyster sauce, there's 3 grams of sugar. That's equivalent to half a teaspoon. So 1/4 cup of oyster sauce, 4 tablespoons, that's about 2 teaspoons of sugar. So if you're watching your sugar content, go ahead and substitute soy sauce instead. The water was actually chicken broth, sorry. So it's a 1/4 cup of chicken broth, 1/4 cup of oyster sauce, and then 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. So I want to mix this in so you can see, done with a fork, this is what's going to become our slurry. Our slurry is a thickening agent. This is the cornstarch and this liquid that needs to be mixed together, and make sure that your liquid is cold so you don't get lumps. This is going to be our thickening agent later on that's added to the dish. The cornstarch gives Chinese food its characteristic shiny gloss. We also use cornstarch more likely with wok cooking because it has a higher heat tolerance than wheat-based flours. Okay, so if the wok is a high intense heat process, the stir frying, then we need a starch that can tolerate that high heat. It is not accurate to say that there is not wheat flour available in China. They use wheat flour for making dough for steam buns and other purposes. All right, and finally then our broccoli. The broccoli was going to be 1.5 pounds of florets, or 1 pound of florets, and 1.5 pounds if it's on the long stalk. So here is 1 pound of florets that have already been cut. I want you guys to see how this is done. That we may get this in the long stalks coming fresh from the farm. We can cut off the stalk itself, get down to a smaller part of the vegetable. Any of these residual leaves can get trimmed away. And for this size, I'd probably do it like cut in half. That's my floret. Okay, same thing. Now, when you buy commercial frozen broccoli, at least, all these stems would be peeled and then cut up in smaller pieces, so you've eaten a lot of the stem. This stem can be put into soup to make broth, ground up to make broccoli juice, strangely enough. Okay, so it's not going to go to waste. For this broccoli floret, if you wanted to, instead of splitting this, some approaches would have you split the stem so that the water can penetrate this thicker stalk. Okay, and again, I don't think that's thick enough that we have to peel it. Now, this is going to get blanched in water that's off to the side boiling, but we're going to do that later in the process so it doesn't get overcooked and turned to mush. And if we're quick and thoughtful in what we're doing, we'll be able to blanch it and use it directly in the dish, and I'll have to shock it in ice water. Okay, now we are ready to begin the stir frying of the beef. It's going to be a flash stir fry. We want to make sure we're working the very strong wok, high heat, we're going to say. We have water off screen for our broccoli that we have not blanched yet. We don't want that to get done too early, so it's sitting around too long, cooling off, getting mushy. The recipe talks about getting a wok hot enough that a couple drops of water will skitter across the wok. So as quickly as these things ball up and then evaporate, lets us know that we're on the right track. We need 3 tablespoons of oil. Going to add to this canola oil. Okay, going to maybe start smoking right away. And to this, we're adding our ginger and garlic and the scallion bottoms, and quickly the beef. Now, this needs to get moved around right away. We would usually be using our shovels that we use for stir frying, but I sometimes find that the traditional tongs are easier for me to move this around. As best as you can, try to get your meat to lay down flat from where it was previously curled up, forced together. And we're just trying to make sure this is brown on all edges. This is going to get finished later on in a sauce. So I just want to get some color on it, and though I don't want it to be raw when I'm done with it, I'm not concerned about it not cooking through, because it is going to get cooked later on in the process. But again, we're just trying to get this browned off. As high heat as your stove can generate, so for us that's a front right burner, and we keep cooking. Okay, for the sake of time, we did turn off the camera and continue cooking the beef while we weren't recording. And I did want you to see one part as I'm finishing the beef, that as meat is starting to finish, I can move it up to the side. And then meat that maybe still had some redness to it, some underdoneness, if you can kind of see, that can go in the middle where the heat is concentrated. I just want to see no lack of red, raw meat here, so I know that I'm done. And then that beef is going to come out of the wok into a separate bowl so that we can continue on the rest of our cooking process. Also, we did the broccoli already in the colander and drained it out, and now it's sitting in a bowl draining. This is just got a little bit of color on it. It's bright. It's still very, very crispy. It was in the boiling water for about 2 minutes. If you feel you must dunk it in ice water to stop the cooking process, so be it. But so long as you wait until your beef is almost done to start that process, you probably won't have that issue. We are going to be continuing some stir frying in the wok. So we do want to get the beef out of the wok, set off to the side, so that we can continue on with the next part of the recipe. And the next part of the recipe, once the beef is out of the wok and off to the side, we're adding another 2 tablespoons of oil. We want to rotate the wok so it's coated. Any parts of the beef cooking process that were stuck to the wok are going to get scooped up, loosened later on with the addition of broth. The mushrooms that we cooked are added in. They're going to get quickly stir fried. And then our broccoli that was blanched and put in the ice water or not, just drain it well, because hot oil and water aren't going to like each other. That also goes in. This is only going to get stir fried for about a minute. We're going to hit this with some salt and pepper. Want to make sure that all items are heated up, especially the mushrooms that might have been out of the warm water for a while. Next, half a cup of chicken broth. So again, this is not to be confused with the other chicken broth and slurry that is still off on this side, not used yet. It's not a lot of liquid, We can move our broccoli off to the side. We do want to concentrate this heat, bring this to a boil. Okay, so as you can see in the video, we have moved the broccoli off to the side, out of the heat so it doesn't overheat, concentrated the bottom of the pan where all the broth is so that the heat is concentrated to help that come back to a boil. Now we're going to add our beef back that has just been cooked just a few minutes ago. Toss this all through. If you recall, the flavoring for the beef, the marinade, had some cornstarch in it. It was cooked onto the meat itself. So that is also going to be functioning as a bit of a thickening agent. So we want this tossed all the way through. Perhaps is now more of a time that we might be using the shovel to make sure that this is stirred appropriately. And once we feel like this is all evenly distributed, then it is time to add our slurry. So again, the chicken stock, the oyster sauce, the cornstarch for thickening. This is our slurry. This will coat everything. We don't want this to become a gluey mess, so we don't need it to be in the wok very long. This traditionally is served atop steamed rice. If you feel like you want more gravy, then certainly you can add more broth than a half cup in that stage of stir frying. I know this is getting done when I can see it kind of make its gravy itself. Again, the characteristic shininess that results from the cornstarch. But back to the gravy question, if you want more chicken broth, add it after the broccoli's been stir fried, and keep your ratios right. If you had 2 tablespoons of cornstarch so far with a half cup of broth, I would think that every additional half cup of broth might need another tablespoon, say, of cornstarch in your slurry. But let's just focus on having broccoli and beef just by itself, nice and coated and not swimming in gravy. That's not the way I would prefer it. And as you can see, we finished with our scallions on top, our garnish. Everything is heated through, and this is a finished dish to be served over steamed rice.